Hello and welcome to the Generosity Solution. I am Rodney Eric Lopez. It's a wonderful to be with you today. I get to talk in these short videos with folks that really inspire me or read books or reports that I feel are really important, really inspiring. And it's just my joy and my privilege to be able to share them with the community. And so today I'm super excited to talk about a book that is both personally and professionally very meaningful to me. And what makes it even more meaningful and more important to me is that it's written by a member of my family. Dr. Elaine Ruiz-López has written this incredible book called The Fight for Equity in the Bronx: Changing Lives and Transforming Communities, One Scholar at a Time. Dr. Ruiz-López is, as you can tell by her part of her last name, she's family, she's a relative, she is my amazing sister-in-law, married to my amazing big brother, Tony Lopez, but in her own right, she just holds a special place in my heart. And I just thought that this new memoir and this new accounting of her work and her story and her impact was just really a really important story to tell at this time. In her words, she says that this book is part leadership roadmap, inspirational memoir, a model of community activism, and a story of a political movement. And so I just can't wait to bring her into the studio so that we can start this conversation. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Elaine Ruiz-López to the studio. Welcome, Elaine.
Good morning, Rodney. Thank you for having me and that kind introduction.
It is my pleasure. We've been talking about this for a while, and so I'm glad we were finally able to align our calendars for this. So I want to get kind of right into it. We talked in our pre-session about, this is not a conversation where we kind of go blow for blow and fact for fact about the book. I want everybody who hears this or watches this to go out and order the book for themselves. I want to have more of a thematic conversation, but there are a couple of sort of factual things that I'd like to explore with you. And I want to start right at the top. If you can just educate those who'll be watching this video on exactly what is a charter school. You're the leader of the International Leadership Charter High School in the Bronx. And so there might be some folks out there who still are a little bit fuzzy on what a charter school is, its place in the larger public educational ecosystem. And so could you just tell us what exactly is a charter school? How does it differ from a traditional school? And kind of why charters to begin with?
That's a great question to start this dialogue with. So charter schools are public schools that are tuition free, and all charter schools are their own local education agency, or otherwise known as their own district. Charter schools develop their own policies, internal procedures, and of course, charter schools have an authorizer. In our case, our authorizer is SUNY Charter Schools Institute. But there are three authorizers in the city of New York. It's the New York State Education Department, New York State Board of Regents, and then there is a SUNY CSI that we are authorized by. Charter schools differ from New York City public schools in several ways. The first way that it differs is that charter schools have their own 501c3 and they're considered nonprofits, and they have what is considered a governing board of directors. The charter schools also are able to hire their own leadership, faculty, and create curriculum that is aligned with New York State standards. However, there's more flexibility in the delivery of teaching and learning and how students learn. So there are 274 charter schools in New York City, and there's a lot of similarities among charter schools, such as, uniforms and, the value that's placed on discipline and academic rigor. However, all charter schools have their own character and personality, vision, and mission. The way that we also differ from New York City public schools is that 20% of our funds have to be raised by us, by the charter school leadership and the board. We are always looking for creative ways to, achieve additional funding, either through grant writing, philanthropy, so on and so forth. But that's how we are different. We're also different in that we don't have the constraints that the New York City public schools have, and that all New York City public schools are unionized. A very large percentage of charter schools, over 80%, do not have a collective bargaining agreement with the U of T. We are one of those schools that does not have a collective bargaining agreement. Charter schools also fall into the category of either being run by a charter management organization or being run independently. We consider ourselves to be a community-grown charter school, and we're an independent, standalone school.
And so it sounds like since the advent of the charter school movement, not just in New York City, but across the country, and understanding that, like you said, there are different kinds of charter schools, or they might be organized differently. It sounds that in general, though, it has turned educational leaders like yourself, who might have been trained to be first teachers and then eventually administrators, principals, people who run a building. It's really kind of forced you to develop new skill sets, right? Because you didn't necessarily go to school and get trained to be a fundraiser, right? Or somebody who has to manage a board, or somebody who has to get involved in development projects and capital campaigns. It's a very different skill set, than a traditional educator would. And so, since you mentioned it, I'm curious, kind of, what was that learning curve like for you in terms of your leadership growth and your leadership path?
The first year, the learning curve was steep. However, I had a great deal of support. I was incubated for a year before opening the school at the New York City Charter Center, where other colleagues of mine who were set to open their charter schools were being supported, trained, and provided with tools and guided, in terms of every step of this venture. And you are correct. These skills are not learned in the leadership and education administration departments at Teachers College or at any graduate school of education. So there is a very large entrepreneurial aspect of running a charter school. And so I had to learn how to manage budgets, how to project finances, how to go through a hiring process, because we had no district that was doing that for us. We have to do it all. I had to learn, how to engage vendors in contracts. I had to learn, how to navigate the politics of running a charter school. I had to also learn, the challenges that went into the decision not to co-locate it in a New York City public school. We chose to go into our own, facility. And we've been in our own facility for the last 18 years. The first 10 years, we leased a commercial space that we renovated. And since 2016, I'm happy to say that we've been in our own, private building that was a ground up construction that I was able to, apply and receive a $21 million bond for that construction. We had no one doing it for us. So a lot of this, most of this, if not all of this, fell on my shoulders. And, going back to your question, the learning curve, was steep at first. However, as a charter school operator, failure is not an option. So you have to learn rather quickly, because charter schools also, another caveat about charter schools and how they differ from New York City public schools is that, we are renewed every 5 years. And you're renewed not only on your academic progress and student achievement, you're renewed on aspects of governance and financial viability. So those three areas are three areas that, I have the sole responsibility of, along with the Board of Trustees, to make sure that we have a viable organization and that we get renewed every 5 years.
It's a massive undertaking. And if you are watching this and you have not really learned about the sort of the under the hood part of starting a school, I highly recommend you read this book, because the story is in some ways very unique to Elaine, but also indicative of what it takes to start a community-grown organization of any kind. It's not easy, and it takes a community, a village, and it takes a little elbow grease as well. So it's a really great story. This is the name of the book is The Fight for Equity in the Bronx, and I think I'd be remiss if we didn't introduce the Bronx as a character in this story. And so I was just wondering if you could just give us just a small anecdote about just your, maybe it's a childhood memory, maybe it's some other memory of the Bronx that you came up in, and what was it like to enter life and the educational system of the Bronx of your childhood? Because I know that was very formative in your career path.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in the Boogie Down Bronx, home of salsa. Absolutely, home of salsa, where, between 163rd and Westchester Avenue, it was not unusual to hear the sounds of salsa early in the morning, and the guys playing their congas at the corner. So I was, attending PS 20 on Simpson Street, where we lived, right across the street from the Fort Apache precinct that became well known after the movie that Paul Newman directed called Fort Apache, which was based on a book written by a police officer from the 41st precinct that was later, tagged as the Fort Apache precinct. Summers were, my parents were very strict. So summers, during our time off, we spent most of our time indoors. However, there was this one program called Summer in the City that took place in the 60s, around 1965, 1966. And as that program allowed for Simpson Street and other streets in the South Bronx to be closed so that children could experience the joy of face painting and arts and crafts and learning new songs and, playing in the street and, having the, our neighborhood pool, which were the pumps, right, opened with sprinklers, so on and so forth. But, my memory is, just running with random joy through, that street, because we had not experienced that much freedom, up to that point, because it was not a safe neighborhood. And my father, being the strict disciplinarian that he was, preferred that we would all be home under the care of our mother, who, was home most of the time while he was working. But that was a very nice memory. And getting on my brother's, my brother had a pair of brand new silver skates, and and he loaned me, one of the two skates, and I was skating on my left foot, and imagining that I was somewhere else, crossing streams and, looking at trees and having the hair blow, the hair blowing in the wind. But that was a memory that I actually wrote about 25 years ago. And that has stayed with me.
That's beautiful. And I appreciate the nuance with which you shared that story, because there was certainly difficulty. There was, you were not, any of us who were raised in the Bronx knows that it can be a place that is lacking in resources, lacking in some very important community supports. And yet where there is family and where there is love, there can also be some really beautiful moments as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. So the other thing I wanted to get into was, as I read your book, I read it not just as your story. I also read it as a love letter to Puerto Rican women. And really, you lift up the stories of some really just powerful women who were advocates, who were fierce warriors for social change, community change, educational change. And so I was wondering if you could share with us just a little anecdote about three people in particular. So I wanted to start, if you could just tell us a little bit about your mom, because life begins with mom for all of us. And so I was wondering if you could maybe share a couple of words about her and her influence on you. If you could share a little bit about Evelina Antonetti and about Dr. Antonia Pantoja. But if you could start with your mom, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, mommy, Lucila Ruiz Rodriguez, who was born in Guayanilla, Puerto Rico, and traveled to the United States during Operation Bootstrap in 1954. In a airplane cargo that basically was really not fit to transport human beings, and somehow they all survived. They had, she described lawn chairs that were bolted down on the floor of the airplane. And it was a 6 to 7 hour ordeal. My mommy, a very beautiful, dark-skinned mulatta woman, born of, Spaniard and African ancestry, was amazing. She was very generous of heart, had this beautiful smile. She sang like a nightingale, and she would have a very cheery disposition despite what I came to know as her anguish and and sadness around raising children in such an unsafe environment, and also having to contend with being a woman of color, in our family and in the community. We she was my first teacher. I recall my mother teaching me to read from El Diario de la Prensa. When I was about 4 or 5, she would sit me down and ask me to read words. She also would speak to me a great deal about her experiences in Puerto Rico. She was very proud of the fact that she, from time to time, she was asked to sing, on some local radio station, and she would enjoy playing the guitar. She was also a great cook, as most Puerto Rican moms of that generation are. And it was a pretty amazing, you know, childhood, as far as having a mother that was so dedicated and there for us, and who sacrificed so much of herself, her own dreams. And I was, very proud when I was able to, graduate, from college, and then, my master's degrees and my doctorate, to honor my mom in that way. You know, I believe that, we inspired each other. Um, and she had a different outlook on what it was like to, run a household. She was very dedicated. She was there 24/7, you know, and I know that that was not the journey that I would lead. I had other plans, and God had other plans for me. So I had a very, um, uh, my life took a very different path from my mom's. However, in my book, I honor my mom and I pay tribute to her in the book, simply because no one gets to where they are alone, you know. And my mother made um, the sacrifices that she made, uh, for her children, and for us to have, the future, and enjoy life, the way that I've been able to, fortunately.
Thank you for that, and thank you for honoring her in that way. Tell us about Evelina Antonetti.
Evelina Antonetti, it was interesting. When I met Evelina Antonetti, she was, probably, the same age as my mom. She was in her late 50s when I met Evelina Antonetti. She was probably about 58 or 59. And so I met her through a friend, that whom I had met through the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights. And, also another woman that had a very generous heart and had very progressive ideals, for the Bronx and the community, where, she served until her passing in 1984. Evelina Antonetti had dedicated her life to fighting for those who were marginalized and the Puerto Rican community, the Puerto Rican working poor in particular, and fighting for, housing. She established also the first, program or programs for, free breakfast and lunch for children. So a lot of the programs that you see today, were modeled after Evelina's, pioneering, pioneering this program at United Bronx Parents that she founded. She actually, fought so hard, to get that building on Prospect Avenue that the city eventually gave up and gave her the building for $1.
Wow.
And yes, and so she was, an ambassador of sorts. She was able to navigate the different personalities in the, political arena. And there were many, politicians, that didn't see eye to eye and weren't necessarily speaking to one another, but they would all somehow converge at United Bronx Parents, requesting meetings with Evelina. Evelina was a force. Evelina was a shining light, that was snuffed out, too early, as far as I'm concerned. However, I benefited, and many other educators and leaders in the community, benefited from the guidance, wisdom, and mentoring that Evelina provided. Evelina taught me how to speak truth to power. I accompanied Evelina once to a school board meeting, that was being run by the then superintendent, Max Messer, who was tracking children and not implementing bilingual education programs. And Evelina, as a fierce advocate for bilingual education, would literally chase him down at every meeting, every public meeting that he was appearing at. And I remember accompanying her. And when Evelina, or Titi, as many of us refer to her as, got up to speak, it was an experience like no other. And of course, years later, Max Messer was fired or removed as superintendent of District 8 at that time for leading a poor quality district and not implementing the programs that the children deserved.
And sounds like
she was also.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, she also wanted to make sure everyone was fed. So there was never a time that you walked into United Bronx Parents, there was not any food being cooked or served.
It sounds like lessons. No, it just sounds, Elaine, like so much of the lessons. She modeled so much of the skill sets that you would have to employ in your own journey, kind of, realizing your vision of the school that you wanted, your vision for a school in the Bronx. It seems like so many of those skill sets were modeled for you by Evelina kind of during that time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. She's missed dearly.
And so lastly, if you could just in this one, just tell us a little bit about Dr. Pantoja and what she has meant to just your career and more broadly to the Puerto Rican and Latino community overall.
Dr. Antonia Pantoja, another pioneer, founder of Boricua College, founder of Aspira, that was intended to serve Puerto Rican youth and empower Puerto Ricans in, not only pursuing education, but also in speaking truth to power as well. And so Antonia Pantoja, I had the privilege of meeting her. I was introduced to her by Tony Lopez, who probably had a much longer relationship with Dr. Pantoja. I was working as assistant principal at a Yonkers public school. And it was a school that was embattled, and it was a school that a team of us were recruited to in order to change and improve the education of young people at that school. This was a school that was still not complying with the desegregation orders of the judge who was, superseded that case. And, it was so such a violent and hostile experience that I started reaching out to community leaders from New York City to come and speak and to our young people. At this high school, there was a television program. And so I was able to convince Dr. Pantoja to come and visit the high school in Yonkers. And she visited, and she went on to this television program, and she broke it down for the benefit of, the community and young people whom she knew would be watching and listening. You know, she spoke about topics of racism without apology. She spoke about how young people cannot allow their futures to be defined by others who did not have a vested interest in their well-being. It was just an amazing, amazing experience. And, you know, Dr. Pantoja also is the pioneer of, you know, the Aspida consent decree, along with Evelina Antonetti, and along with others who fought for bilingual education. We have bilingual education today in New York City because of Dr. Antonia Pantoja. We have the Aspida consent decree, you know, since I believe it's 1972 or 1973. I mention it, or I write about it in my book extensively. Without pioneers such as Dr. Antonetti and Dr. Pantoja, we would have a very different school system and a very different understanding of how immigrant children and children who are learning a second language learn a second language, and what are the best practices in order to do that, and how school systems need to be responsive. We know that, you know, bilingual education was not just it was not just implemented or fought for at the federal court level based on, on a whim, or it was research based. We know that children that are bilingual have bicognitive skills, and that children who have proficiency in their native language must be supported to strengthen that native language in order for there to be a transition to learning the second language. And the Aspida consent decree was premised upon that in order to fully comply with the Equal Educational Opportunities Act and the Equal Educational Opportunity Act, I should say, of the 1960s. How could you have an equal educational opportunity if you are not able to comprehend and have access to the second language and teachers that can facilitate the content utilizing that strength of the first language, you know? And in our context, it is the Spanish language. However, Aspida now, you know, Aspida also benefited, you know, over 130 different language groups. And in New York City, there are that many languages, and children are entitled under the Aspida consent decree to be considered for ESL classes, and having examinations that are in the language that they could understand. So she absolutely, Dr. Pantoja, absolutely, her efforts have not been in vain. And we don't, this has been now more than 40 years, going on, well, actually 50 years since the Aspida consent decree, and we still haven't stopped speaking about it.
Thank you for that overview, because I think that's important. That's important history, but it's also, as you so beautifully mentioned, is not just in the history books. There are still battles being waged and fought over language and access to language, and even with the larger conversation around immigration and belonging, we are still fighting battles of what it means to be American, what it means to have access to equitable educational opportunities in this country. So I loved that we get to sort of frame that part of the conversation on the shoulders of the giants on whom you have stood. And so if we fast forward, because I don't want to go into the story too much, because then we're going to be giving it away, and we want people to buy and read the book. But we can fast forward a little bit and talk about the now, in the sense that you have since done all of this work, done all of this educational, political, fundraising, community organizing work, using not only your academic and professional expertise as an educator, but also sort of the organizational building skills that you've gained through working with these incredible women and other people who you beautifully credit in the book as well. But here you are now in 2024 with this beautiful school in the Northwest Bronx, and expanding, I believe, into middle school, if I'm not mistaken, as well. And you talk about in this book, I think I counted at least 24. I should have come with an exact answer, but I counted a rough count of about 24 mentions of words like purpose, calling, faith, divine timing or intervention, God, scripture. It's clear, even if I didn't know you personally, it would be clear from a reading of this book that you are a woman of faith, and that faith has been an important part of your journey, even in those moments where maybe you felt like maybe you couldn't go anymore, or circumstances conspired to block you or stop you or test you. I happen to be married to a woman who completed her doctorate education as well, and I hear that people who do this, they say it's the torture that you elect to do for yourself. It's that you choose, right? And so you did that with great effect and with great impact, along with 2 additional graduate degrees. But there were long nights, and there were long drives, and there were late nights on the 2 train. For those of you who don't know what the 2 train is, it can be a scary subway train at night. What role has faith, calling, and purpose played in your life, and why has that been such an important aspect and ingredient of your work?
Thank you for asking that question. And I would say that faith has been the pillar of my ability to do all that I have done in the last, I'd say, 30 years, and more recently in the last 18 years running this charter school. I didn't realize it at the time when I was embarking upon my journey to, enroll at City College and later get my master's degrees from Bank Street College, Teachers College, and eventually earn a doctorate from Teachers College at Columbia University. But what comes to mind is that, when God, I believe that when God ordains you to follow a path, you're not always consciously aware of that. I became more aware of that as the challenges increased and the obstacles that I faced required what I consider to be divine intervention. And I would pray and I would seek out members of the church where I attended to pray with me. And I was also blessed with having, individuals that I didn't know who came around me and the school for support, who happened to be men and women of faith who would pray with me. My first director of curriculum and instruction, Roberta Cummings, was a woman of faith. And she came in, not knowing what to expect. You could say that she took her own leap of faith because at the school, we had just recently, overcome the first part of the battle where the Department of Ed wanted to shut us down. It was so easy for this woman, this leader, to reject the opportunity, and she did not. And she stayed with me by my side for 3.5 years, enough time for us to stabilize the school and the school community. I also, have been reminded that, who God ordains, God equips, right? So I believe that God doesn't send you into uncharted territory and into a battle without equipping you for the battle. So what comes to mind is the scripture verse, but the Lord stood with me and strengthened me. I think that's in 2 Timothy. But we also had, board members who I didn't know, who were parents, but they also then became board members who were also Christians and would also pray for the school. I remember having, evenings where we would have prayer walkthroughs at our school when things were really getting hot. I recall instances, and of course, separation of church and state. You can't bring, a religion into a public school. But certainly, we all prayed and we all had faith that God would turn things around, and God proved, himself worthy of that, of that expectation that he would turn things around. But there were many times where we would run out of money and I didn't know how we were going to pay for our rent at the high school. And in fact, we had one landlord who was very shrewd and onerous. He really had no concern over the mission of the school. He just wanted, his $660,000 a year, right? Which was what we were paying on a lease at that time. But I remember he actually we ran into a rough patch in 2014 or 15. And he actually found a judge that would sign an eviction order for us. And, that was devastating because that would have meant that we would have to shut down our school because there was really no place for us to go. Suddenly, someone from an organization in the Bronx contacts me and says that they have this angel donation that they wanted to make to the school for the exact amount of money that we needed in order to pay the landlord. It was for $150,000. That was a God thing, right? From where I said that was a God thing, because how does that happen?
Right.
Because I looked, I searched, I called, and there was no one that was coming forward to say, "Oh no, I made this happen." But that's a very good example of how divine providence, is the only explanation. We also, as the school leader, I had to be very careful because, and as most women of faith who run schools, or who are principals of schools or teachers of school, you're warned against, not engaging in the spiritual, right? Not engaging in in openly engaging in the interventions, right, at that level. But I must tell you, throughout the last 18 years, I have so many examples of children and parents that I laid hands on and prayed for. You know, I have a great, testimony of a young woman, an alumni that I communicated with uh, just yesterday, who, in her senior year, her stepfather tried to kill her and her brother. And, that was a very challenging, a very sad and devastating moment. And of course, we had to engage with the district attorney's office because she was still at our school. We needed to protect her, but we also needed to make sure that she graduated. This young woman graduated as our class valedictorian, went to NYU on a full ride, and yesterday she informed me she's in her first year at Cardozo Law School. That it is incredible. That's another affirmation of faith, because it took a lot of faith for her as well, And we prayed for this child and this child's family. There are just so many examples. But I do believe that, when you set out on a journey such as I did to start this charter school, it was a leap of faith, right? So it's, I have a philosophy, and I've seen this on a magnet somewhere: leap and the net will appear.
Right.
And that's one of my favorite quotes. I found myself leaping a great deal, and the net did appear. And I believe that net is a metaphor for having faith and knowing that God knows the plans that he or she has for you.
That's a beautiful testimony, but more than that, almost an object lesson in vision and in wanting to do something that is big. I think every great teacher in every great faith tradition, and just in every great accomplishment that we've seen in history, anything that's outside of your comfort zone requires faith. It requires stepping boldly. It requires you taking a step, not knowing necessarily if the next step is going to appear. And while
Absolutely.
And while there is an absolute necessity to have a separation of church and state in the classroom and in all of our public institutions, those of us who are in leadership positions, or even just people in the community who care, absolutely, I believe it's powerful, to exercise your faith, to pray, and to do all of the things that call in the spiritual, because we talk about the civil rights movement sort of in this quaint way. We think it's cute that people got together and sang movement songs and all of that. That's sort of the domain of black and white documentary films that we can look back on with almost a casual quaintness, and yet there is real power in people moving in faith, moving in community, and when faith undergirds your intention to create something new, it's a really beautiful thing and a powerful thing. And it sounds like you and those who've surrounded you have really held up to that, and that's a really it's just really inspiring. And the results are made manifest in the incredible results that you and your team have achieved at the school. So I'd like to close with just sort of like a what's next. Your memoir closes with this beautiful epilogue of class pictures from each of the classes since 2010. It's really beautiful, and also just some testimonials from students themselves about what this educational experience has meant for them. But what's and also I know that you've brought some alumni back. You've had some alumni come back and do some work at the school, either as volunteers or as employees, and that's a really beautiful thing. So, what's next? What's next for you, and what's next for your school?
Well, what's next is that we're in the process of waiting for the completion of our permanent school building for the middle school. We did open the middle school last year with a sixth grade class, and we're going into our second year of operations at the middle school. But the answer to that question is that what's next will be determined by the needs of the school and the school community. My focus has shifted to the alumni, and staying in touch with the alumni, and perhaps developing an alumni association, or having annual breakfasts or luncheons with the alumni, who could continue to inspire our young people at the high school with their testimonies and their stories. We also are very interested in telling and writing. I'm very interested in writing about their stories. Probably not any time in the near future, because my current or first publication was just released 2 months ago. But certainly the alumni will continue the legacy, my legacy, and telling their stories, and how the International Leadership Charter High School has changed lives and transformed communities one scholar at a time.
Amen to that. So I just want to thank you deeply for this time, Elaine. It's been me. There's nobody sitting here next to me. I've been talking with Dr. Elaine Ruiz-López. She is the founder and CEO of the International Leadership Charter High School and now middle school. The vision is expanding, the team is expanding, and while there is still very important work to do on a daily basis in terms of education, really important work to do, the results have just been nothing short of astounding. Young people from the Bronx getting a world-class education, getting exposure, going to colleges and universities and experiences that are just top flight. And now, in addition to running a school, also now in the stage of kind of legacy building, succession, and all those really exciting things that are really important in the building of an institution. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you for spending some time with me.
Thank you, Rodney. Thank you for those great questions.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. So if you'd like to learn more about this story, I highly recommend that you just get this book. It's called The Fight for Equity in the Bronx, Changing Lives and Transforming Communities, One Scholar at a Time. You can get it on Amazon or your favorite bookseller, or just go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it for you. If you have any questions or you'd like to learn more about what we've talked about today, or just about anything relating to the Generosity Solution, which is just a focus on generosity, purpose, and the arts, you can hit me up at Rodney Eric Lopez at all the socials. Thanks for watching, listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.